Mordejai es un historiador israelí especializado en el Imperio Romano de Oriente, también conocido como el Imperio Bizantino. Tiene un doctorado en la Universidad de Princeton en el año 2017 y realizó investigaciones postdoctorales en la Universidad de Notre Dame en Indiana y en el Instituto de Estudios Ambientales de Annapolis en Maryland. Hace más de un año y medio que se manifiesta públicamente en contra de la guerra en Gaza y lidera el grupo Bearing Witness Gaza, que documenta los acontecimientos en Medio Oriente de los últimos 2 años a través de un archivo público, recopilación de testimonios y otras herramientas en desarrollo. Ahí tienen el link para entrar a la página de Lee, que es witnessingthegazawar.com, que pueden entrar y hay una cantidad de recursos de materiales gigantes. Se las dejamos ahí, después si la quieren nos vuelven a preguntar y se las mandamos. Rafa Porzecanski es máster en Sociología por la Universidad de California de Los Ángeles y licenciado en Sociología por la Universidad de la República. Va a ser el entrevistador hoy en nuestra actividad. Actualmente dirige el área de Opinión Pública y Estudios Sociales de Opción Consultores y es docente de la Facultad de Administración y Ciencias Sociales de la Universidad Ort. Tiene formación especializada en conflictos, desigualdades e identidades étnico-raciales, habiendo además realizado varios estudios sobre las colectividades judías y afro-uruguayas del país. Entre otros trabajos, publicó El Uruguay Judío, Demografía e Identidad. Le doy la palabra a Rafa y bueno, bienvenidos todos de vuelta, gracias y comencemos.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes. Primero que nada, muchas gracias a la Casa Mordejai Anilevich y al Centro Progresista Judío de Chile por la invitación. Y por supuesto, muchas gracias a todos quienes se conectaron esta tarde para este evento. Para mí realmente es un placer y un privilegio poder ser parte de esta conversación con Lee Mordechai, un académico que ha hecho y está haciendo un esfuerzo extraordinario de compilación documental para ayudarnos a entender qué ha sucedido y qué está sucediendo en Gaza, un pequeño territorio de Medio Oriente sobre el que existe al menos un consenso básico fundamental. Desde hace casi 2 años, la situación humanitaria que vive su población, es decir, los palestinos gazatíes, es lisa y llanamente catastrófica. Antes de hacer el switch al inglés y comenzar a conversar con Lee, quisiera hacer una breve reflexión. Quizá a algunos les sorprendiera que dos instituciones judías y sionistas convocaran a una actividad de reflexión sobre Gaza. Sin embargo, las cosas son mucho menos sorprendentes de lo que parecen. En primer lugar, desde el judaísmo que abrazamos quienes somos parte de esta actividad, es imposible dejar de referirse y de debatir sobre el más trágico de los capítulos del conflicto israelí-palestino. Un capítulo que comienza el 7 de octubre de 2023 con una masacre sin precedentes a población judía en territorio israelí y que continuó y continúa con otra masacre sin precedentes a la población gazatí en territorio palestino. Además de la preocupación humanitaria por un conflicto y una guerra que nos toca tan de cerca, hay una segunda preocupación que fundamenta este evento y sobre la que me gustaría detenerme unos pocos minutos. Estoy hablando de una necesidad constitutiva del ser humano: saber la verdad. En este caso particular, conocer qué ha ocurrido y qué está ocurriendo en Gaza. Como muchos de quienes estamos aquí sabemos, la producción de conocimiento es una actividad donde la tradición judía tiene una historia riquísima, con aportes fundamentales en diferentes ramas de la actividad, tanto científica como periodística. Desde Albert Einstein a Sigmund Freud, desde Hannah Arendt a Carl Bernstein, desde Emil Durkheim a George Steiner, desde Yeshayahu Leibovitz a Daniel Kahneman, desde Karl Marx a Milton Friedman. En los últimos días tomé conocimiento que, para una minoría de mi querida comunidad judía uruguaya, esta actividad está reñida con principios o valores judíos. A título personal, quisiera decir sin ningún enojo, pero con mucha firmeza, que no imagino un evento más judío que uno fundamentado en el deseo de saber. Por supuesto, no hay ninguna pretensión de que este sea el evento definitivo sobre lo que ha sucedido y sucede en Gaza. El objetivo no es cerrar un debate necesario, sino abrirlo todavía más, estimular la aparición de otras voces, otras conclusiones y otras metodologías, pero con el mismo propósito que la actividad de esta tarde: preguntar, escuchar, reflexionar y finalmente volver a preguntar. Para cerrar esta introducción y terminar de fundamentar la necesidad imperiosa de contar con actividades que fomenten la curiosidad y el conocimiento sobre el conflicto israelí-palestino, me gustaría leerles dos pasajes de dos textos bien diferentes. El primer pasaje pertenece a un guión cinematográfico y hace alusión a un problema generalizado, pero particularmente acuciante en el caso de la guerra en Gaza: la extendida existencia de narrativas políticamente interesadas de un lado y del otro, que empañan más de lo que aclaran y distorsionan más de lo que afinan. La frase la pronuncia un protagonista de Chernobyl, la miniserie que narra cómo la Unión Soviética ocultó su responsabilidad en el mayor accidente nuclear del siglo XX, basada en un libro de la Nobel de Literatura Svetlana Alexievich. En el último capítulo, el personaje Valery Lagasov, científico ruso interpretado por Jared Harris, se pregunta lo siguiente: ¿cuál es el costo de las mentiras? No es que las confundamos con la verdad. El verdadero peligro es que si escuchamos suficientes mentiras, ya no reconoceremos la verdad en absoluto. ¿Qué podemos hacer entonces? ¿Qué nos queda, salvo abandonar incluso la esperanza de encontrar la verdad y consolarnos, en cambio, con relatos? La segunda frase es del sociólogo norteamericano Robert Merton. Fue escrita hace varias décadas, pero tiene una vigencia total en este contexto tan permeado por la llamada posverdad. En su texto, Merton nos advierte sobre la importancia que tiene, antes de preguntarnos sobre las causas de un evento, establecer que dicho evento efectivamente existió. Cierro entonces mi intervención en español citando a Merton. Antes de proceder a explicar o interpretar un fenómeno, es aconsejable establecer que dicho fenómeno realmente existe. A veces, en la ciencia, como ocurre a menudo en la vida cotidiana, hay hechos que nunca existieron. Los observadores pueden, con la mejor voluntad del mundo, informar sobre regularidades que, al ser examinadas más de cerca, resultan ser ilusorias. Este punto puede ilustrarse con el célebre caso de los rayos N, reportado en 1903 por el físico francés René Blondelot. Blondelot, junto con muchos otros científicos competentes, llegó a convencerse de que habían descubierto una nueva forma de radiación, a la que llamaron rayos N. Durante un tiempo, numerosos experimentos parecían confirmar el fenómeno y se publicaron artículos en revistas prestigiosas. Solo más tarde, cuando investigadores escépticos no lograron replicar los hallazgos y se introdujeron experimentos controlados, quedó claro que los rayos N en realidad no existían. All right, after this introduction, in which I hope I have explained the key motivations behind this event, I would like to welcome Lee Mordechai. Thank you so much, Lee, for being with us today. First of all, I would like to ask you to introduce your project, Witnessing the Gaza War. So, could you please tell us how, when, and why your work began, what it is exactly about, and who is sponsoring it?
Great, yeah. So thank you so much, Rafael. And before I begin, I would like to thank Rafa and Rafael and the Casa de Cultura, Mordejai and Anilevich for organizing, sponsoring, and putting all of this together. Much appreciated, and I thank you all for being here right now. So I'll start by just talking a bit about myself and how I ended up here. I'm an Israeli. Have not been a political person for my life. For most of my life until maybe 2 years ago. I did go to some of the demonstrations in Israel in recent years, but it was always like one person out of a large crowd. I did not initiate anything. I did not lead anything or like speak out in any particular way. I was one person out of like 10,000 people in a crowd. It happened. It just so happened that I'm an academic and I was on sabbatical over the academic year of 2023, 2024. So in August, I moved to the United States with my family. for a 1 year sabbatical in August 2023. And then October 7 happened. And one of the striking things to experience October 7 from abroad was, and this is something that I realized the day of, maybe even the hour of, right after I was, my spouse woke me up, was that within Israel, there was like a very distinct discourse of what was going on. People understood one story, saw one aspect of reality. And since the beginning, there were other realities that were not shown in Israel. I mean, for me, the defining moment was when I saw that in the most popular website in Israel, it's called Ynet. It was like a news flash saying something along the lines of that there was that the IDF suspected that multiple hostages were taken into Gaza, and this was at the same time that I was looking at other sources of information where you saw video after video of exactly this happening, right? So there's like this dissonance between at least two different narratives of what was going on, and that dissonance continued. It was much easier to access from outside of Israel, where I was. And I continued to observe realities in Gaza, uh, trying to consume both Israeli media and non-Israeli media at the same time, try to understand like all the different parts of this story together. And eventually it became very difficult to do so because of what I saw that was taking place in Gaza. And I'm talking here about like late October, November, and December 2023. In late December 2023, I mean, I tried a few things, none of them seemed to work. I ended up deciding in late December 2023 that I should write because I'm an academic and that's the kind of stuff I know how to do. And so I started writing and publishing a report that came out, the first version of which came out in January 2024. And I've continued since. The last update is maybe from 2 months ago, where I updated one of the large sections in the document. So this document started off as like 8 pages long. It's currently like 220 pages or so in English. I publish it in both Hebrew and in English, so two different but identical versions. And I update them periodically. So that's like the broad idea. In December, my work was profiled in the Israeli media outlet newspaper Haaretz, and received a lot of attention there. And that led to several dozen Israelis volunteering to help in my project. So I can show us some of what we're doing, and I'll share my screen right now. So I can show all this. So I hope, can you see this, the screen?
Yes. Yes.
Right, so this as well, right? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so this is kind of some of the stuff that we do. This is our website, Witnessing the Gaza War, that Rafa mentioned earlier. But these are some of the stuff, these are some of the tools or resources that we've already put out or are about to put out. And so we have an archive showing almost 1,000 records, all based on the document that I've written. So this is just the beginning. We have like way more, about 10 times as much. But we're going to put them all online slowly but surely. Each of these is pretty detailed, so you can go in and play around, look for yourself for some of the information over there. Then we have a blog written by academics to a general audience. We have a smaller archive of testimonies by international doctors. This is going to go online probably later this week with several dozen records. And later in September, we hope to release this tool, which is a mapping tool that would allow users to search and understand Gaza spatially. And in this case, for example, there's like this slider down here, and you can see which buildings, individual buildings, each of these is an individual building, which of these was destroyed at any point in Gaza and over the past couple of years. So this is where things are currently at. You mentioned who's funding this? Nobody's funding this. It's completely unfunded. We are not, I mean, so far, we're probably going to change this after almost 2 years of working. completely unfunded. But I think it's become a little more difficult after publishing all this stuff and having about 100 volunteers. So we will start fundraising, but until now, it's basically nobody. It's myself and like several dozen other people who feel strongly about all this.
Great. So now that you've already shared the screen, I think you can go ahead and I know you have a presentation, short presentation for us, so you can go ahead and then we'll start with the questions. Sounds good?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just start with the presentation and kind of speak briefly about what's going on in Gaza more generally and also more specifically over recent weeks and months. So perhaps to start with some context. So I think what Gaza represents is some kind of new kind of war, right? So Israel's conduct over the past couple of years has systematically challenged laws and norms that were supposed to determine how civilized wars should be conducted in the 21st century. And there's like a long list of things that were not supposed to happen and have happened in this war and are continuing to happen literally every day now. I mean, anything from the United Nations Security Council, which demanded an immediate ceasefire, Israel refused. The International Court of Justice in The Hague ruled that Israel must guarantee humanitarian aid. Israel refused to do so. Israel has used food as a weapon of war for almost 2 years. Over the past couple of months, more than 300 people died of starvation. At least 300 people died of starvation and malnutrition. There's a lot of evidence for indiscriminate attacks. There's a lot of evidence for attacks on hospitals. I can go into details about any of these things if any of this is of interest. I'm trying to keep a broad overview here. There's widespread destruction of infrastructure, also a few videos, not videos, screenshots of that. There's also widespread use of controversial weapons and systems. So artificial intelligence for identifying targets is a huge problem. Suicide APCs. APCs stand for armored personal carriers. Sniper quadcopters. I mean, a lot of this kind of stuff, which again, we can go into details later on. Let's talk about Gaza, but let's talk about Gaza today. And so this is a map put out by the United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, briefly. This was from last week. And it shows us that 86%, more than 86% of the Gaza Strip, this is the Gaza Strip, right? 365 square kilometers in total, 86.5% of it is either under Israeli military control or under evacuation orders. So the only places where the civilian population of Gaza can be without being shot is this small white area over here and this thin strip over here. You can see the numbers over here. So far, the minimum number of dead, these are people that we identified by name, that are identified by name by the Gaza Ministry of Health. So almost 65,000 deaths, over 162,000 people are injured. The density of the population within these areas is very high, as you can see here, more than 42,000 people per square kilometer. This is much more than Singapore or Hong Kong or all these other places, which we tend to think about when we talk about crowded and dense places. We could talk a bit about nutrition in Gaza. So this is maybe like a weird graph. It takes like a while to figure out what's going on here, but each of the lines inside here, each of the colored lines corresponds to an area or governorate within the Gaza Strip. So this is the blue one is Gaza City, the North Gaza area is like this orange one. And then you have different foodstuffs, right? So cereals like bread, for example, pulses, lentils, for example, dairy products, protein, those like meat, vegetables, fruit, oil, and sugar. And then you have a number here, so starting from 0 at the center to 7 at the outsides. This corresponds to how many times a week does an average Palestinian eat one of these foodstuffs, right? So before the war, this is what people used to eat. So they used to eat like vegetables every day, and they used to eat oil every day, and sugar most of the days, and cereals as again wheat or bread every day. And if we fast forward to last month to July 2025, so a month and a bit ago, we see that there's almost nothing. So most Gazans would eat bread maybe once every couple of days, would eat lentils once every couple of days, a little oil and more or less nothing. Things did improve a bit over August 2025, but this is the context for why people are dying of starvation and malnutrition. And the numbers of people who die are much larger than the ones that are being recorded. The ones that are recorded are only the ones who die in hospitals. We could talk a bit more about the various things, the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and what's going on there. I mean, the various the strong needs or hunger that people are willing to risk their lives to try to get food, whether here that all these are like people swarming over trucks. This is what you see over here. They're often being shot at, as here in many other videos. These are different gangs that Israel is supporting within especially the southern Gaza Strip. So we can talk more about any of this as well. These attacks on aid seekers happen daily over the past 3 months, since late May 2025. Over 2,300 people have been killed seeking aid. So these are people who just like try to get aid that is to say food, for their families. These are these masses of people, as you can see over here, and they tend to be shot at for different reasons. We can get into the details if that is of interest. But what these two are images or screenshots from a video, which shows this mass of people all lying on the sand, and there's like more people over here, and on this like small area of dirt, someone is shooting. Someone probably being the IDF is shooting, and you just like see the bullets hitting the sand, and these people are like waiting here and being afraid and not really knowing what to do. So this is the kind of stuff that you can see almost daily. And you can see other images as well. What you see here, this again is a screenshot from a video taken from some kind of like Thai camera or drone or something. And what this shows is a tank. There's an Israeli tank that checked this entire route over here. And once it finishes, that's like a signal for all the people in the area to start to run to get the aid. Because it's like a free-for-all. If you go first, you get aid. If you don't, you're not going to get aid. So all these like black dots all over the place, this mass of people over here and this mass of people over here, these are all people, individuals who are running to get aid, and this happens daily. These are the people who are being shot at, as you see over here. So once they take all the aid, they're being shot at as a signal for them to go away. This is what the 60 meters here is referring to. So we could talk that's about starvation and the humanitarian situation. We can also talk about the destruction of Gaza. This is a map again from a UN service from maybe like a month and a half ago. And what it shows us, again, these are the white areas are areas that are still accessible to Gaza, and it shows us that only 1.5% of cropland in Gaza is available for cultivation. So there's de facto no agriculture left in Gaza. And Gazans, or the civilian population in Gaza, is really dependent on international aid being brought in. That's really the only way in which they survive. So we can see this. You can also see the destruction of buildings. So this is data coming again from the United Nations, UNOSAT, which is like a satellite service that is run by the United Nations. What this shows us is that out of about 190,000 buildings within the Gaza Strip, each of these colors corresponds to how many of these buildings are damaged or destroyed. This data is correct this is the last data that's publicly available as of early July 2025, so 2 months ago. And what it shows is that about 80 to 100% of buildings in Rafah and Khan Yunis, northern Gaza over here, the southern part of Gaza City over here, 80 to 100% of buildings are damaged or destroyed. I'll show satellite imagery as to how this looks like from satellites. About 41% of all buildings are completely destroyed. You can see the housing units again. A third of the housing units are destroyed. More than half are damaged. Half the hospitals are partially functional. The others are out of operation. 81% of roads are damaged or destroyed. And you can go on and on. But the destruction is widespread, and it's also often not shown to us. To us observers, people outside of Gaza. Definitely not in mainstream media. Here are a few examples, right? So I mentioned Rafah. Rafah is the southernmost city in the Gaza Strip, right? This over here is the border between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, currently controlled by Israel since May 2025. sorry, May 2024. So this is Rafah. Rafah, like early 2025. This again is the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Egypt over here on the south and the Gaza Strip over here. Right, I'm just gonna move between this image and this image from May 2025. So again, widespread destruction of roads, buildings, and so on. You can see built Rafah, destroyed Rafah, yeah, built Rafah, destroyed Rafah. Right, so you have a lot of that going on. Here's a different image again, early 2025, same Philadelphia corridor over here. This is Rafah within the Gaza Strip. This is the Egyptian side. And it's completely destroyed, right? To look at this this new route that was built by the IDF, was constructed by the IDF to push or to move forces deeper in. So again, moving back, a built city, a destroyed city. Again, this is like widespread destruction of buildings after buildings. That can get into a lot of detail about who exactly is doing this and why they're doing this, if this is of interest as well. And we can also look at Gaza City, where things are currently going on. And this is Gaza City, or the southern part of Gaza City, the Zaytun neighborhood. So early August 2025, this is a month ago. This may be like a couple of weeks ago. Again, widespread destruction of this area. Gaza City, I'll move back for a second. Right, so Gaza City is one of the areas that were not like completely destroyed like Rafah or Khan Yunis. And this is the area that we're talking about now. That is being destroyed after this satellite image was turned into data over here. Yes. So I think I'm going to wrap up here and open the discussion because that's what we're here for, I guess. Yes.
Great. Thanks for your presentation, Lee. So now let's talk a bit more about the findings and the structure of your work. First of all, as we all know, the Gaza war was triggered by Hamas invasion of Israel on October 7, 2023. During this attack, Hamas massacred about 1,200 Israelis, most of them civilian Jews, and kidnapped around 250 hostages. So your work begins acknowledging these facts, but you do not have a specific chapter to establish all the facts related to this massacre. So could you tell us the logic behind the decision not to document the Hamas massacre in detail?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually pretty simple. I mean, at the base of it, I mean, it's just like resources and time, right? I'm one person. I started off as one person. I worked for about a year by myself as one person. And one of the things I noticed is that there were a lot of Israelis back then, and still are, who are concerned with October 7, and there's like quite a few civilian projects, such as myself, who have tried to document, I mean, the different people who were kidnapped or the different people who were killed, where exactly did it happen, how exactly did it happen, and so on. I mean, more or less. And I felt back in October, November, and December 2023 that is something that others more capable, smarter people were able to do and did it far better than I could do. What I did notice is that among Israelis especially, I mean, nobody wanted to deal with October 8th and onward, right? So this is the reason, right? I mean, there are other people who can do like the October 7th stuff. Back then, I was also not in Israel, so it was much harder to figure out, I mean, to go on and talk to people and to do all that from the United States. And it just felt that October 7 was horrible, of course, but what was going on already in October and November 2023 was horrible as well. And nobody was paying attention to that, especially not in Israel, but also internationally, very few people were paying attention back then. And in a sense, this was my call outside for people to look at what was going on. It was just like too difficult for me to stay silent after seeing images from Gaza coming out every single day.
Great. So my next questions actually are related to some of the hottest debates on factual issues surrounding this war. I will begin with mortality statistics.
Sure.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I understand, there is no major debate regarding the overall death toll in Gaza. as you said, now we have around 64,000 Gazans who have been killed during this war. A few days ago, for instance, former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett, who is ideologically very close to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, explicitly admitted in an interview that this number is a valid estimate. However, there is a fierce debate about the proportion of civilian versus non-civilian death. So I would like to ask you a few questions regarding this. First, what is your own updated estimate of that ratio, and which source are you basing it on? And second, how high is that ratio compared to other recent wars?
Okay, so these are good questions, and I think they are quite fundamental to the way we understand the events of the past couple of years. I'll start off by saying that the numbers are, as I mentioned earlier, the numbers, almost 65,000 people who have been killed, these are numbers that come from the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. Now it's important to understand what these numbers represent and what they do not represent. What these numbers represent is a bottom count, right? These are individuals who are identified by their name. These are individuals whose names are being published every month or two. The Ministry of Health puts out this thousands-page document organized by age, from the youngest to the oldest, in which you have, for all these individuals, you have their names, their ages, their sex, their ID numbers, and you could just see those people, right? Just see them page after page after page of newborns and then children and all the way until the elderly. But these are only people who died of trauma, right? So these are only people who died of trauma and have been registered by the Ministry of Health. There are two academic publications, the only two academic publications that have been published on this issue so far. Both of those argue that this is actually an undercount by about 40%. Both of them reach similar conclusions using different methodologies. Now, if you believe that, the number is actually much higher. There are also other people who are not listed within all this, right? So these would be the easiest examples would be people buried under the rubble. Thousands of people are clearly buried under the rubble and are inaccessible, so they're not being brought to hospitals and not identified and listed within those lists. And you also have the excess mortality. So these would be people who die of related causes, but not of trauma. By trauma, I mean people being shot, bombed, airstrike, stuff like that.
We listened to that about excess mortality during the COVID, right?
Yes, it's a similar thing, right? So a person who dies of starvation would not be listed within the 65,000 almost, right? A person who has some chronic disease and that can't get their medicine is not going to be listed there. A person who just gets sick and does not have any place to go to and dies because of lack of care would not be listed there as well. And there's a big debate as to how many people have actually died. I mean, I don't think we can answer that debate conclusively. I think where experts would currently put the line is somewhere around 100,000 people. Either side, give or take a little. But I think that any number you would provide is political, and therefore I think many people and institutions would rather go with the minimum number. The minimum number, I think, is almost 65,000 people that have listed. But I mean, anyone honest would say that is an undercount. That is a clear undercount. And the real question is by how much is it an undercount? And the only way to answer that would be a census. And nobody's going to do a census anytime soon, right? So I think that's a question that we're going to keep debating for quite some time. In a sense, it doesn't really matter. I think it's horrible enough as is. And obviously, the specifics are important eventually, but for me at least, the key thing, the key goal or objective right now is to stop this. Right? And after that, we can debate. We can debate a lot of things after all this debate ends. But it's not now. I think now the key point is just to bring this to an end.
Right. Any comments on that ratio, civilian, non-civilian?
Yeah. So again, it's hard to say anything about the civilian to non-civilian ratio because you don't know exactly how many people died, right? Now, Israel for a while argued that it tried to, Israel for a while, until the second ceasefire, until January 2025, it would periodically put out numbers about how many terrorists or militants or Hamas people it killed. And those numbers were always round and nice. A lot of people suspected them. They kind of like moved in a way that you would not expect. There was no methodology involved. There were no names, or almost very few names connected to those people. And they reached the number of 20,000 just before the second ceasefire. I don't think anyone really believed it back then. I don't think nobody does believe it right now, but there are a lot of indications that that number is like way inflated. There's been an expose maybe like a month ago, if I remember correctly, three or four weeks ago, arguing that if you look at the IDF intelligence, they have like a list of the people that they think they've killed. And that list is about 9,000 people, a bit less. Now, again, these are people that the IDF considers terrorists, right? So these would be journalists, for example, that the IDF considers terrorists, and they're fair game and you can kill them. They would also include others who are low-ranking members of the civilian government in Gaza. Right? They happen to serve Hamas, who's in control or was in control of Gaza. But these are not necessarily people who are ideologically affiliated with Hamas. They can be people anywhere from police officers to logistic individuals or like street cleaners or stuff like that. And there is evidence that these people were targeted earlier in the war as well as later. And so I think it's very difficult to know. I mean, in my report, which came out, the last version of my report, which came before the expose, I mean, I thought and still believe that more than 80% of the people who are being killed, this is probably higher than that, are uninvolved civilians. I mean, I think that's looking at the ratio of women and children that are being killed. If you take the women, children, and elderly, it's about 50% of the people who are being killed. I mean, you get a sense that there's like very little. I mean, there are targeted assassinations, but these targeted assassinations kill a large number of civilians with them. And there are like multiple examples of this. There's a British NGO that looks at civilian harm. They're called Air Wars. I cite them pretty widely within my report, and they show that. I mean, they go and track different attacks on that harm civilians, and they try to collect all the information possible. So all the information, all the Facebook pages of the people who were killed, images, and so they go into like very detailed analyses. I mean, I don't think there's nothing compared to their methodology, which is open source at least. And they point out that at least when they focused on like October 2023, for example, and there they reach. I mean, they show that in the vast majority, as in over 90% of cases where civilians were harmed, there were no militants or no suspected militants that were involved as well. And that shows you, I think, that, I mean, there may have been militants. I mean, who knows, right? Nobody really knows. But when you have like 100 civilians being killed and no suspected militants, I mean, I think that's a problem. It's a big problem. So this is what I would say about the ratio. And if you look at the proxy, I mean, the women and children proxy is an easy proxy to try and understand how many civilians are being harmed in wars. And if you compare that to any other recent war, and I do that, there's like a long, dense paragraph in my report that does that. You see that in Gaza, it's much higher than in other places.
Good. All right, so continuing with controversial topics, I would like to ask you about your definition, among others, of Israeli actions as a genocide. So I want to ask you two major questions. First, how do you respond to those who argue that if Israel really wanted to commit genocide, it would have killed many more civilians than it actually has? And then, those who reject the genocide label also claim that although some Israeli leaders have made very unfortunate statements about Gazans, the Security Cabinet responsible for war decisions and the IDF have never expressed an intent to commit genocide. So how do you respond to that argument as well?
Okay, so let me share my screen again. So this is the definition of genocide as in the Genocide Convention. This is like the most popular or the most commonly used definition of genocide, because I mean, there are obviously many different definitions. I use this one. I think this is like the consensus. I think one of the important things to point out is that, I mean, this is the key article, right? Article 2. And genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy. The intent is important. In whole or in part, a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. And then you have these 5 different acts that you can do. One act is to kill people. Other acts do not necessarily include killing people. Act number B, or Act B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. None of these actually involve B, D, or E do not necessarily involve people killing other people. So again, there's like, I would start by saying that. That being said, I would also point out that I think that this discussion, which draws a lot of attention, I'll stop sharing so you can see everyone. This discussion that draws a lot of attention, I don't think that's an important discussion at the moment. Again, I have my opinion. You might have your opinions, any of the people here in the audience. I mean, I would assume that none of us are experts. Maybe there is. Maybe there's like a world expert here. Great. I am not a world expert on this, but I do know how to read, and I could read what I showed there. And I think that what I see within Gaza, within the Gaza Strip, the indications that I've seen and collected and meticulously documented with like 4,000 sources and 200 pages or something, I think this is what I see. Now, again, some people might disagree. They would want to call it in a different name. I don't mind. You want to call it in a different name? Again, it does. I don't think it really matters at this point. There are going to be lawyers who are going to debate this for years to come, and after they reach a conclusion, other people are going to debate this. Is like very clear. That being said, I think the key point is that we need to stop this. Let's stop this first, and then we can debate it. Maybe it's genocide, maybe it's not genocide, whatever. I would say 2 additional things. One is that as a person who was born in this country, in Israel, and was raised here, I mean, the notion that I would live in a society that is being accused of genocide, is standing trial, undergoing a process in the ICJ for genocide, that already is horrible to me. I mean, even if it's not
the David Grossman argument, right?
What is that?
David Grossman has said something in that line.
Something along these lines, yes. I mean, even if it is not a genocide, even if it's an almost genocide, or 1 step or 2 steps or 3 steps away from genocide, none of these things is going to make me happy. None of these things is a place where a person, I believe, a person would want to raise their children, right? None of these things is okay. Even if the ICJ decides in like 2 or 3 or 5 years that this is not a genocide, this is not a win for Israel by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, people would try to spin it in that way. I do not feel that at all. Now, the last thing you mentioned, and I do want to refer to this as well. I mean, so you mentioned unfortunate statements by officials. And I mean, I don't think those are unfortunate. I think those are purposeful and pervasive. I mean, one of the parts of the project that I'm working on is actually going to collect all these different statements by officials of the state, politicians, and so on. That being said, yes, you can try to draw a line between those people and the people on the ground, right? The soldiers on the ground, the officers on the ground. That being said, if you actually look at what those people on the ground, so the soldiers, and especially the officers, middle-ranking officers, I mean, these are the people who are actually like doing a lot of the fighting. If you see what they're saying on their social media, right? We're talking about social media, people just openly speaking in that way. There's a Palestinian journalist who I've spoken to, I've interviewed him, and he has collected, I refer to his work in my document as well. He's collected, last I checked, over 110 cases of officers who are uniformed within the Gaza Strip using that kind of language, using language such as, we need to kill them all, we need to destroy Gaza, we need to get rid of all these people, we need to ethnically cleanse Gaza. I mean, these are openly spoken. These are not things that receive a lot of attention. I think the media prefers not to deal with this. But I think that if you so these would be the statements which have not drawn a lot of attention. I think what has drawn a little more attention are the videos coming out, IDF soldier videos coming out of the Gaza Strip, showing the dehumanization of Palestinians. And I think both of these work together. I mean, you have to dehumanize individuals to such an extent that then once you dehumanize them and you take all these again, videos and images, the distance between that and just like stating that we need to kill them all is very short. And that's what I've been seeing. And again, if you want to see some of these videos, go to the website, look at the archive, search by theme, and Israeli soldier videos. There are like 100 something of these. These are not normal. Again, this is not how, I mean, I believe a healthy society should react even to a horrible thing such as October 7th.
Thank you, Lee. Okay, so as you're aware, 4 researchers from Bar-Ilan University have published a 311-page report titled Debunking the Genocide Allegations, a Re-Examination of the Israel-Hamas War. The report covers Israel's actions in Gaza up to June 1st of this year. Basically, the work denies many of the crimes Israel is accused of by strongly questioning the quality of the evidence that supports these accusations. Given the importance of your work, you are cited many times in this report. The journalist Nir Hasson reported that your name appears 155 times in the original Hebrew version of this report. Before asking you about this work, let me read you one paragraph from page 28 of the current English version. Mordejai's database proved valuable to our research because it compiles a wide range of studies, reports, and position papers from academics, UN agencies, and human rights organizations, all of which assert that Israel committed serious and systematic war crimes during its conflict with Hamas within the time frame of our study. We reviewed these sources and present our findings in the chapters below. The ongoing Israel-Hamas war, like all urban conflicts, has caused death, destruction, and enormous human suffering. But many widely cited claims, when cross-checked against primary sources, including those referenced by the organizations themselves, fail to withstand scrutiny. Some are uncorroborated, others are contradicted by the very data on which they are based. So, Lee, what is your general view of this report and how do you respond to its critique regarding the reliability of the sources you use in your work?
Yeah, I mean, to my sense, this report does something that too many supporters of Israel do. And what this is, I mean, this thing that they're doing is essentially to sow doubt, right? They're challenging or critiquing certain kinds of information. I mentioned the Palestinian Ministry of Health data, for example. They point out that that data is not perfect. Yes, that data is not perfect. No data is perfect. I mean, if you want to cherry pick and look at the individual case out of the 65,000, I mean, yes, you can find like errors here and there. These errors are being fixed over time, but you can still always find like small issues and inconsistencies. Right? I think what this report is trying to do is to sow doubt and try to delay, postpone, deflect the criticism from Israel. I think that within Israel, the Hebrew version of this report that came out in early July 2025, so a couple of months ago, this actually drew a lot of attention on Hebrew social media. And I think that led to, at least from my understanding, the most profound public debate in Israel on anything related to this war. I mean, people actually took that report apart. And I think that the overall conclusion was very negative towards what they did and didn't do, right? For example, within that report, they decided to follow only the IDF spokesperson account, right? So that is what matters. They discount both international NGOs, for example, human rights organizations. They discount international doctors as unreliable. They discount IDF soldiers, local Palestinians. So all of those somehow have are biased, whereas the IDF spokesperson, an institution that has proven to lie again and again and again. And we only need to remember the Rafah massacre of 15 Palestinian paramedics and first responders in late March 2025, and the different versions the IDF put out, which were unbased on any reality. But yet, within this report, they seem to focus on the IDF spokesperson as some kind of purveyor of truth. I do not believe that is the case. No, nowhere close to that. So I would point out that I would point out that there are other places where I think they prefer to not look at the evidence, right? And maybe a good example here would be airstrikes. So the majority, probably vast majority of people who are killed within the Gaza Strip are being killed by airstrikes. What this report does is essentially discount that. They say, I mean, we can't tell. There's probably a good reason for an airstrike being approved. There's a process. We trust that process. We can't know anything more. Let's move on. I don't think that's a strong argument. And the last thing I would say is that, which is also two things, I guess I would say, that are telling, which I think go a little beyond this particular report, but I still think are important to understand the dynamic of this war. One of these things is the fact that there are no international journalists that are being allowed into Gaza. And this is, we're 23 months in, and there have been no international journalists let into Gaza. I mean, this is like unprecedented compared to any other conflict.
My next question was going to be about this.
Okay, so so I'm building into that. But this is unprecedented, right? I mean, and even during the ceasefires, there were two ceasefires, one of which was a month and a half long. No international journalists were being let into Gaza. I think this is a failure of the international community, international media, for not pointing out that this is the case every single time. And by accepting the narrative of one of the sides, the IDF spokesperson individually, because Israeli journalists are also not let into Gaza. I mean, the only way you can go into Gaza is with the IDF, right? So they take you on a tour, they show you specific things in specific places, and you talk to specific individuals, but you don't have access, neither as an Israeli journalist or as an international journalist, to random soldiers or random Palestinians. You can't just walk around or anything like that. So I think that is one thing that must be put out there. The other thing that must be put out there is the abysmal level of or quality and quantity of data put out by Israel and the IDF. There's literally nothing, no hard facts that are being put out, right? I mean, if you look at reports, these are reports, any NGO would put out a report about whatever they work on, right? Humanitarian aid, doctors, whatever. Water, electricity. I mean, you have reports for each of these things, right? International reports. We are almost 2 years in, and as far as I can tell, there are exactly 2 Israeli reports that have been published. These are 2 Israeli reports being published by the Israeli Ministry of Health, and both of them concern the welfare of hostages during their time in captivity within the Gaza Strip. There is still no publicly available report about October 7th, for example. The state has not put anything like that. The state has not put any report out about the war, right? So again, when there's no data, the only thing you can do, and this is what this report is doing, the report that you cited, is to challenge and doubt and critique the things the narratives that are out there. And again, nothing is perfect, obviously. I mean, this is why I keep on improving my report. This is why I don't publish it as a book or anything. I prefer to write a version and update it with another version, keeping all the old versions so you can see how my thinking has developed and how more information is being accessible and so on. But I think that the lack of information, the lack of reliable information actually serves one side. And I think that it's very clear which side that is. Yeah, I can go on about this killing journalists and so on. I mean, that's like also an important part of this conflict. But we don't have a lot of time, and I think you have more
Right.
questions, or the audience also
Yeah,
has. Yes.
I will ask you a couple of final questions before giving the chance to the audience to ask their own questions.
Yep.
So let's see. As you said, there are many limitations for having good information. So my questions, well, that will happen to any scientific work. So I suppose there are areas where you feel more confident about the quality of the evidence, and others where you think that much more research is needed. So could you tell us which of your findings you consider very solid and which ones you think are more open to debate and need further research?
Yeah, so I mean, these things change over time. I mean, at this point, I think some of the clear indicators or stuff I'm certain about, very certain about, is, I mean, again, look at mortality, look at injuries. I mean, I don't think that's like there's any doubt about these things. Now, I mean, there was doubt like earlier during this conflict, but that's like been a long time ago. You can also point out to the destruction of the Gaza Strip. I think that's like, again, I don't think that's up for any debate. Nobody really argues about that. I think one of the important and interesting questions is to what exactly is going on within the IDF. Yeah. Is what we're seeing the result of individual units? Is it widespread? How widespread is it? The destruction and just, I mean, how widespread are certain norms within the IDF? For example, the widespread destruction of buildings. I mean, this was a practice that seems to have developed bottom up. So this is not like an order that people that like the high command, supreme command, like to decide that the IDF has to destroy this or that, like this entire neighborhood. But my impression is that this again, this is a bottom-up process, as does to say that soldiers and officers on the ground decided to start first burn buildings and then destroy buildings just because they could, and there was little to no de facto no attempt by the Supreme Command to stop this. Right. So to try to trace this process, how it developed over time, that is still a little murky. I mean, how exactly that happened and who are the people who pushed this? How exactly did it happen? So that I'd be less certain about. And I think other parts that are not entirely clear are, I mean, you could look at some of the American support. I mean, what exactly does it contain or how much American support is Israel receiving? I mean, you have like the big numbers, but what exactly does this mean? I mean, you have to depend on like sporadic reporting, debates within the American government, the American state. Yeah, I mean, the way I see this, the United States is like a fundamental part of this, and this conflict could not have continued without consistent and constant American support, widespread American support as well. I mean, they're essentially bankrolling this and providing diplomatic immunity to Israel. So some of the debates within the government, what do they know? What do they choose to allow? This is unclear. I mean, some more of this stuff has come out over the past like month or so about the Biden administration. Maybe people have seen this, but people from the Biden administration have started speaking out after like a while in which they haven't. And I'm sure that there are going to be more people who are going to speak out later on about the early Trump administration. So this is kind of some of the stuff I'm not like completely certain about. Yeah, I mean, this another thing that's I think a little murky are propaganda efforts. I mean, again, how widespread are these? How effective are these? And who exactly is behind them? I mean, how exactly does Israel use its formal and informal supporters? to push certain narratives. So again, there has been some work on this, but I think there's like much more that could be done.
Great. Well, I have a last question for you, and that question is about Hamas.
Yeah.
So your work mostly focuses on the consequences and the nature of Israel's military actions. However, some analysts, journalists, scholars argue that Hamas bears huge responsibility for the suffering in Gaza too. So the main arguments of this line are that first, of course, that Hamas initiated the war. Second, that the humanitarian crisis would have ended immediately if Hamas had freed the hostages and surrendered. Three, that Hamas has extensively used civilians and civilian infrastructure as a shield. And finally, that Hamas has systematically stolen food from the local population, contributing decisively to starvation in Gaza. So what is your take on these accusations against Hamas? Which of them do you consider fact-based, and which ones do you think are not?
I mean, I think we have to differentiate between two things here, right? I mean, first, I'm not coming here to defend Hamas. I mean, I write that October 7 was a war crime and crime against humanity. I mean, to me, that's very clear. So I'll put that out there to start off, right? That being said, I do believe in facts. I do believe that we need to keep our facts straight. I do not buy into talking points. And I think a lot of the stuff that that Israel is pushing are essentially talking points. They're not necessarily substantiated by facts, even if you go on and this would be admitted by Israeli officials if you push them hard enough on it. Let's take two examples that you mentioned, right? One is the use of civilian infrastructure, specifically hospitals. Israel has long in this conflict argued that Hamas is using tunnels under hospitals as command centers and so on. And it justified some of its actions against these hospitals by that line of argument. I think the most famous case is the Al-Shifa raid, the Al-Shifa hospital, the largest hospital on the Gaza Strip, which was raided in November 2023 for the first time. Back then, Israel argued that there's like the main command center, main bunker of Hamas is located under Al-Shifa Hospital. It's connected to 5 buildings. It was like a nice animation showing how all this is going on. Israeli forces go in, held that area for about a week, dug all over the place. They did find one tunnel. That tunnel was like on the perimeter of the hospital, not connected to the buildings. And they destroyed the tunnel, I mean, before leaving. So this was like destroyed the evidence or whatever. There are like reports on this by both the Washington Post and CNN that argue that this is, I mean, it's very clear that it was not the central bunker of Hamas. That has been, until May 2025, that has been the only tunnel discovered under a hospital that Israel has shown evidence for, right? Israel has claimed consistently that there are these tunnels under hospitals. It took over some of the hospitals temporarily, destroyed some of the hospitals permanently, but have not shown additional tunnels. And this is an AP report from November 2024 that looks at this and says that they tried to look for any other more evidence for tunnels under hospitals, and they couldn't. The only one they found within the hospital perimeter was the Shifa one. The next one in May 2025 was in the European hospital, if I remember correctly. But that's a later thing, right? So this would be one thing. The other thing is the argument that Hamas steals aid. This is an argument that is, again, being circulated by Israeli officials and Israeli supporters. That being said, again, if you push Israeli sources hard enough, they would say that actually Hamas does not do this. Hamas cannot go and steal aid because once they would do that, they would be shot, right? They just don't, they cannot operate that way. The ones who are actually stealing aid are militias that are being supported by Israel. This is, for example, the Yasser Abu Shabab clan in the southern Gaza Strip between Rafah and Khan Yunis. And these people, I spoke to several people who were inside Gaza, humanitarians, people from the UN, from NGOs. I went down and interviewed these people. And they told me that the only place in the entire Gaza Strip where you can see a Palestinian with a gun um, standing in a checkpoint, maybe like 100 meters away from an IDF unit, is in southern Gaza, in this area where again, Israel is supporting these militias. And the reason they're supporting these militias is obviously to weaken Hamas's governance. This was said by Netanyahu himself, right? So I think I think it's very clear that, there are two kinds of people who steal aid. One is the more organized gangs and militias that Israel is supporting. The other are ordinary Gazans. And these are the people, I showed some of the images of these people just like swarming on trucks, trying to get food, flour usually, to go and bring it back to their families. And this is tolerated and accepted by the United Nations and the various NGOs that bring food in. Right. So this is not, but neither of these is Hamas. If you actually look for the evidence for Hamas stealing, that's not the way they operate. They have like other ways.
All right. So I'm done, and I will give the word to the friends of the Casa Mordejai Anilevich. So I guess they will have questions from the audience to share with you.
Great. Thank you, Rafa, and thank you, Lee. Thank you for all the insights that you provided. We received some questions. I summarized all the questions in two. So there are two questions that have a lot of questions within, as you can imagine. But I organized those questions in two main topics. The first will be related to the destruction of Gaza, what you showed in your presentation, and this question asks if you think that this situation that we are currently going through is a situation that was planned from the beginning. No, it's a planified situation. It's a general plan for the strip, and also related to that, if this responds to a strategic military decision or it's a political decision. How these decisions, the political and the military, interact between them. Is there a military autonomy, or there's a political autonomy? And how this is very, very strange for us Latin Americans, but how can the army be the one that stops this? How can the army be the institution that's able to stop this if the government doesn't want to stop this?
Okay, good questions. Was this planned? It's very difficult to say. My guess, as from what I've seen, is that probably not. I do not think this was planned in this sense. If you go back and read some of the discourse, what people were saying back in like late 2023, the sense was that they had, Israelis thought that they had few weeks, maybe several weeks until then United States President Joe Biden would shut all this down and not allow Israel to continue. And they wanted to get as many achievements as possible and conduct as many operations as possible. And that seems to imply that this was not planned from the beginning. Now, I think what I am seeing, and this kind of like ties into the second part of your question, is that there's this dynamic that I think nobody can really stop, right? Not within Israel and not outside Israel. And the dynamic happens because, different reasons inside and outside of Israel. Outside Israel, you can look again at the United States and Donald Trump as its president and pro-Israel supporters of Donald Trump who are very much in favor of continuing this. That'd be one example. Within Israel, you can see that, the current Prime Minister Netanyahu, he knows that once this ends, he's out and he's probably going to face time in jail, and he doesn't want to do that. You can look at some of his supporters, some of the more extremist right-wingers. These would be people like Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, and key ministers within this, which have a lot of political power within Israel right now. These people would much rather get rid of Gazans from the Gaza Strip, resettle Gaza. I mean, that's also a big thing. And I think it's very difficult for Netanyahu, who I think deep down would not want to resettle the Gaza Strip. I mean, I don't think he understands that it's a very expensive and pointless exercise, I think. But I don't think he can really resist this. Right? So you have that on like the broader international and domestic political scenes, but you can also look at the military itself. And I don't think the military can stop this either. Within the military, what I mentioned earlier about the destruction is the same kind of thing that you see with regards to rules of engagement, for example. Who are you supposed to shoot and when, and what happens if you shoot someone you're not supposed to shoot at? Or you could see the same thing with looting. And in those cases, especially earlier, and looting, especially earlier in the war, rules of engagement, I mean, that's like a complete mess. One of the things that becomes very clear again is how many of these processes are bottom up, right? So there's like this essentially one guy who puts out videos. He's like a settler type rabbi who operates like heavy machinery and destroys buildings in Gaza. And he claims that a lot of the destruction was his initiative, right? So he started it and showed this and made it and popularized it, and other people copied him and started destroying buildings. I mean, wherever their units were. Maybe he's right and maybe he's wrong. I don't know. But the point is, yeah, he's like an officer. Yes,
Okay,
he's an officer. Avraham Zalbiv is his name. There's actually like a word in Hebrew, the Zalbiv means like the destroyer, right, which was made up based on his family name for like the widespread destruction that he brings to areas in Gaza. But the point I think is that there is very little central command can do to stop this. Now, I believe that there's a dynamic within Israel that would explain it. Maybe I'll try to be brief about this. But I would say that even before October 7, Israel has been a very fractured society. You had like on one hand people who were like Jewish Israel, right? You had on one hand people who were in the far right, like secular type, messianic and religious and you had those people. And you had like a different group of people, which would be, let's say, the Tel Aviv liberals. And all those people and everyone in between are supposed to serve in the IDF side by side. And I think that the planners in the IDF, this is my interpretation. Again, there's like no evidence, no hard evidence for this. I mean, I'm trying to look at reality and trying to understand how this came into being. But I think planners in the IDF probably decided that they're going to allow units to essentially make up their own rules, right? So if you're like a settler and a settler unit and you want to kill as many Palestinians as possible, and this is like something that settlers have eulogized settlers who were killed in Gaza with, right? There are at least two, maybe three funerals in which such eulogies have been made. Like the friend of the guy who was killed speaks about the guy who was killed, saying that the guy who was killed entered Gaza to kill everyone, right? Women, children, men, everyone they can see, right? So that kind of stuff. So if you want to do that, you can essentially do that within this conflict. If you would want to behave more morally, you can also do that as well. If you are a Tel Aviv liberal, you want to think of yourself as like a moral person, a good person, an internationally looking person, internationally aware person, you can do that as well. And I think what the IDF does is tolerate both those approaches and everything in between. Now, I think that only works to a certain point because one of the things that we're seeing is that in many ways things now morally things are worse now than they used to be like in the days and weeks after October 7, when everyone was like up in arms, blood was boiling, and so on. it's easier to commit atrocities today, certain atrocities at least for sure, than it was back then. And I think that is also very telling. You know, the things that were not okay in October and November 2023 are like they happen daily now. And again, shooting people who are looking for aid. It's like a daily event today. When something like that happened, the Flower Massacre in late February 2024, that drew media attention worldwide for about a week. Today, nobody cares. And that's like completely normalized. And I think that's part of the scary stuff that's going on in Israel, and the IDF and this conflict is that so much has been normalized. And I personally think it's going to be very, very difficult to get back morally from this.
You're muted, Rafa.
So you note a change in the IDF structure and behavior in this operation.
Yeah, I mean, these are not things that are static. These things definitely change over time. And you see practices being copied by people. I mean, you also see practices moving between different areas, right? So practices, IDF soldier practices I mean, taking videos of yourself with captives, for example, or wearing women's lingerie, right? So that started in Gaza, but you see the same things happening in the West Bank when soldiers go into buildings and areas in the West Bank. You see the same things happening in both Lebanon and Syria, where you have IDF troops until now. So people are definitely seeing this through social media, really, and they are still sharing this kind of content on social media pretty freely, not as freely as they were earlier on, for obvious reasons, but still there's quite a lot of this stuff coming out.
Okay, and now the following question is related to the internal front in Israel. There were two questions. I will merge them into one group of questions. Do you think that the hate speech and the incitement to crime, that it's normal now in the Israeli media and in the Israeli public speech, will be somehow legally prosecuted after this war ends, if there will be something there? And do you think that this war will end by external pressure, or the internal pressure in Israel is big enough? And how do you feel about your job, and have you been pressured by doing this, by speaking out? And if there is press freedom in Israel nowadays, like if the press can speak with freedom in Israel. And,
Okay,
and I will
so
add one more. Only sorry for this, because we related to the people that are starting to the young people that are starting to refuse to go to the army. If you can comment about that.
okay, press freedom. I mean, relatively speaking, there is. I mean, I would say that the main concern is that most Israeli journalists just are uninterested in really reporting on this. I believe they've done a horrible job. I mean, there are a few ones that are good, but by and large, they've done a horrible job in conveying to Israel or Israelis what is actually going on in the Gaza Strip. They show very little. Very little footage, very little coverage of events in Gaza, even though, I mean, this is all happening like an hour and a half, or maybe an hour and a half, more likely, from where I'm sitting right now, an hour and a half by car. I was pressured, yes, nowhere as near as many people would think. And by and large, I would say that the price I've been paying for speaking out, again, is far, far less than I expected as well. Which makes it perhaps even more shocking that so few people are willing to speak out, because most of us are not speaking out. Most of us are afraid, I think. Yeah, so I think that answers that question. There was an issue about soldiers who were refusing to serve. I mean, that's actually not new. That's actually something that we've seen like for well over a year at this point. And that is a problem for the IDF. The IDF is finding solutions, different kinds of solutions, ordering more reservists, trying to bring in more settlers. Settlers are people who are ideologically motivated and just like uh, enlisting them as reservists as well. Bringing in older people as well. I mean, so you do see this going on. I don't think this is going to stop anytime soon. It's not going to stop the war anytime soon. This is my take of things. I think the IDF is by and large doing a good job in mitigating the dissatisfaction of growing numbers of Israelis who were not willing to continue fighting. That being said, that is still a minority position within Israel. If you look at trust in the IDF, trust in the IDF spokesperson, both of them are very high. And I would say, again, as a non-expert on Israeli society, but as a person who lives here, is that at least among Jewish Israelis, the IDF is one of the institutions that does bring people together. It's like one of the few things that people agree about here. And they can agree about it, I think, partially because a lot of the stuff is just unknown. A lot of the stuff that the IDF is doing is unknown and not shown to Israelis in mainstream media outlets. I think that answers briefly everything. I know we don't have a lot of time, but
Yeah, we thank you very much. Yeah, we don't have much time. There are some more questions, but I will leave them aside. We want to thank you very much for this time. We really enjoyed it. I hope that everyone enjoyed this. And if you want to say a word or two, please feel free, and then we'll turn to Spanish once more to close the event.
no, I mean, thank you. I mean, again, to all of you guys for being here, asking questions, thinking about this. I mean, by all means, I think this is. I mean, I would see this as my responsibility, definitely as an Israeli, perhaps also as a Jewish person, to understand what is going on. This is not something that, I mean, figuring out, I mean, the truth and doing so critically and being willing to listen, consider viewpoints that are deeply uncomfortable, I think is an obligation that we have. I feel that I have at this point. And I'd like to thank you all again for being here and staying until the end. I understand that this is not like an easy thing to hear. It is not easy to watch or understand or experience as well. But again, this is in a sense our responsibility or my responsibility. I'll speak for myself. My responsibility. Yeah, so thanks.
Thank you. Y bueno, paso al español y también invito a Rafa y a Vale si quieren decir alguna cosa. De mi parte, agradecer a todos y todas los que se conectaron hoy a esta llamada. Esperamos que haya sido una actividad significativa. Y bueno, los dejo a mis compañeros si quieren decir alguna cosita y ya cerramos.
Bueno, agradecemos a Lee, también a Rafael y a Rafael por la actividad. Creo que es importante ver distintas visiones y distinta información. A veces no tenemos acceso a toda la información que presentó Lee y nos hace reflexionar sobre cómo procesamos y la información que nosotros tenemos acceso y también qué información queremos escuchar y no queremos escuchar. Y que, sin embargo, yo les dejo también presente qué consecuencia tiene para nosotros como judíos en la diáspora, que tenemos alguna conexión con Israel y que nos definimos nosotros como organizaciones sionistas, este tipo de situación y experiencia para el futuro de Israel y que también cómo nos presenta o nos expone quizás más a otras situaciones de mayor vulnerabilidad.
No, yo simplemente agradecer por la invitación y también destacar, creo que es un acto de valentía de parte de dos instituciones, como dice Valeria, judías y sionistas, haber promocionado, respaldado esta actividad. Realmente fue un verdadero placer conversar con Lee, aprendí mucho, sigo aprendiendo todos los días de este conflicto tremendo y de este capítulo terrible del conflicto que estamos viviendo ahora. Así que, como siempre, estaré a las órdenes y muchísimas gracias por mi lado también.
Muchas gracias a todos. Nos estamos desconectando. Seguimos en contacto por distintas maneras. Y bueno, que terminen bien el domingo. Chau, chau.
Chau, chau.